Is putting in. There's some folks. All right. Good evening, everybody. See people logging in there. Thanks for joining us on at least in Calgary, a very lovely late November evening. Hope you're doing well. And I can see we've got people from Vancouver Island, Edmonton, and a number of other places in between, probably some places further east if I look at everybody's um, handles there. So really quickly, we're going to start and introduce Annabel in just a moment, but quick reminder, a couple things. First of all, if you have any purchases at the shop, including from the sale, or more importantly, if you have your Kensington Wine Market a whiskey Advent tasting sets, a quick friendly reminder that we would appreciate it if you would come and pick it up because the store is literally crammed with stuff. And now we're trying to wrap corporate Christmas gifts. So the sooner you can come in and collect your purchases and reunite yourself with them, the better. If you're waiting for packing, we have made a lot of progress on that. So the packing list is getting caught up. What else is there? I think this is our second last scheduled tasting of the fall. We have one more next or 2 weeks from now. It's 2 weeks from, yeah, 2 weeks from now. We have a Cadenhead tasting coming up in 2 weeks with myself and Doug Page, possibly someone from the Kensington team as well. Everything up to including a mysterious 40-year-old Highland whiskey. That's I've heard rumors it's from Glenmorangie, but that's just a rumor. We can't confirm it. It's just pure speculation. But there are still some spots available for that. And then our 2026 tastings are going to start coming out next week. We'll have some both in-store events and some virtual events planned for January and February. So stay tuned for that. I'm really thrilled tonight to welcome Annabel Thomas, who's the founder of Nc'nean Distillery, and her export sales director, probably man of many hats, Chris Mabin, who may be familiar to some of you. We've seen him in store before for Compass Box tastings, formerly with Elixir Distillers as well. Chris has been in the industry for a great while. Good friend of Kensington Wine Market. We're thrilled to have him on tonight. So, Chris, welcome, but more importantly, Annabel, welcome. We're thrilled to have you here for a tasting today.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
Andrew.
much. I'm very excited to be here.
So, I think what we like just what would be great, why don't we do one whiskey? We'll start off with the first whiskey. And then what I think would be great to do is to hear your story because you have a bit of a unique story. Um, and I'd like to hear, you tell it to us. But I think a lot of our tastings, we do this intro and then people are just getting thirsty. And I think it might be good to start off with a whiskey right off the bat. And we're starting off with the
Yeah,
Nc'nean Organic Single Malt. Um, do you want to tell us a little bit
exactly.
about this whiskey?
Yes, I think it's very important not to talk about whiskey without drinking whiskey. So I wholeheartedly support that start to the tasting.
Particularly when it's
So
midnight.
well,
Yeah,
quite
that's right.
exactly. Um, so yeah, Nc'nean Organic is our flagship whiskey, so it's a great one to start with. As you mentioned, Andrew, I came to whiskey probably in a fairly unusual way, although I don't know if there's any usual ways into whiskey, but um 13 years ago, I was a strategy consultant in London working in a big corporate. And through a few ways, one, really the location. So the distillery is on my parents' farm, but perhaps more importantly, a trip that I took around Scotland led me to starting Nc'nean. So originally it was a family dream. It was something we talked about around the dinner table, but never really did. And I had the opportunity in 2012 to take a sabbatical from my corporate job. And I said to my family, well, look, why don't I write the business plan for this slightly crazy idea? Because we keep talking about it and not doing anything about it. And that led me during my time off to get much more kind of closer to the industry, go and do lots of distillery visits. And whilst I found lots of amazing whiskies, I didn't find any distilleries that were really thinking about sustainability or kind of innovation in terms of how the whiskey was being made, and in particular the spirit side. And I'm sure we'll talk about that a lot more. And I thought, well, someone needs to do this. This is both an opportunity, but also, I feel passionately that sustainability is the future of our industry. It's the future of hopefully all industries around the world. And hopefully some of Nc'nean's role can be to help the Scotch industry move more quickly in that direction. And I think that's really important if we as an industry are going to thrive and attract the next generation of consumers into Scotch. So that was back in 2012. Originally, I thought this distillery was going to magic itself up out of nowhere whilst I worked on it on Saturday mornings. And because I'd gone back to my consulting job by this point. But by mid-2013, it became clear that that was not going to happen. And that we either need to stop talking about this dream or start doing something about it in a more structured way. So mid-2013, I left my consulting job and started working on Nc'nean full time. It took us 2 years of fundraising, 2 years of building, and we finally started distilling in 2017. Much of that phase was not an easy journey at all, but it was pretty awesome once we finally got spirit flowing from the stills. And fast forward to 2020, a mere 7 years after I started working on it, and we had this product to show, which is Nc'nean Organic, our flagship whiskey. So what you are drinking is hopefully an embodiment of what Nc'nean is. It's kind of the it's our core product. It's what I envisaged when I started Nc'nean. We say that everything that Nc'nean produces should be fruity and elegant, and I think Nc'nean Organic embodies that in spades. It is all based on our light, fruity, pure new make, and it is then matured in 3 cask types. So we have STR red wine casks, ex-bourbon and sherry. And we mix those in a very specific proportion to make this. The sherry is teeny tiny, it's 2%. So we always say that should be kind of like seasoning. And then the rest is roughly half STR red wine cask and ex-bourbon, slightly more STR, slightly less ex-bourbon. And those 2 casks are really at the center of Nc'nean's maturation policy. And they really are a true embodiment of 2 casks being greater than the sum of their parts. And it's like a choir. They play together very nicely. The STR red wine casks bring extra fruitiness. They bring a bit of spice. They bring a lot of intensity. They're quite a powerful cask. Whereas the ex-bourbon casks are much lighter. They let the spirit shine through. They bring some lovely sweetness and all those other things that you would expect of an ex-bourbon cask. But the combination of those 2 casks, and we've spent a lot of time playing around with the right ratios between the 2, I think is really special. So those 3 cask types are combined to make Nc'nean Organic. And as with everything we make, it is non-chill filtered, no colour added, and it's bottled at 46%.
Well, it's lovely. It's quite like very creamy, very fruity. One of the things that I think we can't help but talking about now, even though we might get into it a bit more later, is you have long fermentations for your whiskey, which I think doesn't get talked about enough by the industry as a whole. And I think there's a reason for it. And it's because most of them got very commercialized, homogenized, similar yeast strain. Yeah, very short. One of the things we can't help but talk, I mean, I know Dr. Jim Swan played a role in helping you with your production. And one of the hallmarks of that is that longer fermentations, very precise cut. And I think as a new distillery, it's really crucial. You can have something that's got a lot of character at a young age, but what you don't want are those rough edges on it as well.
Yes.
And I think just starting off with this, like I'm assuming we're talking 5 to 6 year old roughly spirit in this. And
yeah, go on. Sorry, go on.
And I said, and if that's the case, maybe there's some that's a little older in here now too. Regardless, like it's very approachable. It doesn't smell young. It's got a lovely character to it, even at a relatively young age.
Yeah. So many things to talk about in that question, Andrew. So yeah, first of all, age, that's the easy one. It is no age statement. We now have 8-year-old whiskey. Most of our flagship batches will have a mixture of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8-year-old casks in there. It's probably an average of around 5. but you will often find 3-year-old casks in there. And this whole, so it's really interesting thinking about Jim Swan. So Jim was our master distiller. I worked with him from, I think, 2011. So really, really early doors, really before I'd actually spent much time working on the project. We had him on board. His philosophy has been really central to the way we make whiskey, but we have also taken some important diversions from it. So the really important, Jim's philosophy was you can absolutely make a delicious young whiskey. And to make a delicious young whiskey, you need great spirit and you need to put it in great casks. So the core spirit recipe that we make, which is what goes into Nc'nean Organic and various of the other ones that we'll try tonight, was Jim's design. And the STR casks that I just talked about are also a Jim Swan classic. But the spirit side is actually the bit that I find most fascinating and most under focused on within whiskey. And it's not just the fermentation length, it's also things like the yeast. So Jim's philosophy was make a flavorful but pure new make. And if you make a flavorful but pure new make, you have a great base for a whiskey before you've even put it into a cask. And I mean, I think that just makes logical sense. But to get to that, you actually have to pay attention and time and investment to every single part of the spirit creation process. You can't just worry about one. So for us, it starts with the grain. We only source organic Scottish barley. That organic barley is deliciously tasty. We mash slowly to make sure that we extract maximum flavor from the grain at the mashing stage. At the fermentation stage, we use 2 yeasts, which play a kind of dual role in extracting yield, which is unfortunately essential to some extent, albeit we have quite a low yield overall, but we are here to make alcohol, and flavor. So those fruity flavors is what we're looking for from that yeast. And then we have long fermentation times. So our standard fermentation times are a mixture of 68 and 114 hours. The standard in the industry is 60. So both of those are higher. And then we distill slowly and have those high cut points. And those high cut points both cut out the less attractive flavors that aren't going to be delicious in a young whiskey, but they also pull out those flavors that come over early, which are all the delicious fruity notes, which if you've made the effort to create in the fermentation, you can then capture lots of in the spirit run. So that is a very core philosophy to us. But as we will discover when we come on to taste some of the Huntress ones, we have also diverged from that to do some experiments and some different things, which I'm pretty sure Jim would not have approved of, but we will never know because very sadly he died 2 weeks before we first were able to turn the stills on. So we benefited from his knowledge, but sadly he never got to taste the Nc'nean spirit.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I mean, I don't want to put the cart ahead of the horse here, but one of the things that I find is fascinating is that you actually have 2 different distillates. And, but again, I don't want to get to that too soon because that's part of it. Just quickly on this whiskey, Sean, I don't know if you have any comments on it. I think this is a lovely, very approachable, very drinkable, flagship bottling.
Yeah, I think what I kind of admire about it. So, okay, I got to preface like I actually haven't had a lot from Nc'nean. We only have a handful of bottlings now, but even then, I don't have a reason for it. Just one way or another, just haven't really got around to tasting a lot of it.
The world is awash with whiskey, Sean. I mean, there are reasons.
But I have to say I was surprised when you said like sherry bourbon and STR, especially a heavier dose of STR. I think because I find it a little bit difficult to pick one of those casks out. I can tell that there's a little bit of bourbon in there, but STR it's like the color's not too in depth. It's not too I don't know. It's not too char heavy, but you do get those wisps of smoke from the char. Maybe it's European oak. Tough to say.
Sean, I think I know what you're like. I mean, let's be I think more blunt. We're used to STR making dark whiskeys that are like really oaky right off the bat, and you're not getting them. Like that's
Totally.
essentially what you're getting at, right?
Yeah, and
So
also that like I like the finesse of being able to confangle like a bunch of casks together without individually picking them out. Like, because I think it's
mhm.
with a heavier hand in one form or another, I think it can end up with a more overt style, I suppose. And this isn't that. This is a little bit more elegant, which I really like.
Yeah,
Which
because
I
we've
would
seen a
say
lot
is the
of,
power
sorry,
of the blend.
Mm.
yeah.
That, that's what I mean, it's the single malt, but the power of blending casks together to make a single malt.
Mhm.
That is the power of a single malt over a single cask, for example, is that you can bring things together that don't just showcase one element or one side. I can see Craig asking the most excellent question, which is what is
What
STR?
is STR? Yeah.
So STR is so Jim Swan, who's this legendary kind of master blender and known in particular for his kind of insight into creating delicious young whiskies, and he's been involved in lots of the new whiskies, both in Scotland and around the world. Kind of pioneered this new cask type, which he called STR. So STR stands for shaved, toasted, and recharred. You can STR any cask, but most STR casks are red wine casks. Ours are American oak Spanish wine casks. So
Mhm.
they've been used once to store Spanish wine in for around 5 years, red wine. And then they are shaved, i.e., the inside is a tiny bit of the inside, like 2 mil is taken out. They're toasted, i.e., heated, and then recharred. So think of a ball of fire going through the middle. And what that process does is caramelize the red wine sugars. So if you've had a red wine whiskey, you can often taste the tannins. It's often kind of pinky in color. The STR process takes away much of that, and you get a completely different result. So you end up with a very active cask. It's got a very high char level on the inside, but it's not just a new oak cask that has been charred. It's had this previous inhabitant of the red wine, and the caramelizing of the sugars that were in the red wine bring a very specific property to these casks. So because of the char level, they tend to be quite active. As you guys were saying, they bring a lot of color and they're very intense. And I think the worst example of an STR matured whiskey is one where the whiskey is completely overpowered by this very active cask. So they're casks that need to be managed quite carefully and used in the right way. But used in the right way, I think they can be a fantastic kind of element of a whiskey.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, to Sean's point, I'm still surprised, even thinking that half of the liquid roughly is STR, that it's still very balanced. I mean, because we've seen a lot of STR casks, not just Scottish ones, but even distilleries in Canada, and they're over the top. And this is
Mm.
anything but that. Yeah, really fruity, some nice cheesy tones in there. Like you can see that long fermentation starting to creep into it, which is a style that I really love. But a great starter whiskey for us. We can something to build on. We of course have lots of other questions for you, but why don't we go into the second whiskey, which is the Huntress Lemon Meadow. And I know Sean has questions about this, but maybe you won't have them. We'll have to see what Annabel says about this before. Maybe the questions will
Okay,
not be
great.
there. So yeah, tell us about the Huntress range and Lemon Meadow.
Okay, perfect. So Huntress in a little box like this and in one of our blue bottles, we have 2 limited editions per year. And we have the very exciting proposition tonight of doing a kind of vertical tasting of them, which is something we don't get to do very often. So I'm very excited about this lineup. So Huntress is our limited edition that comes out in spring of every year. And it is focused on a lot of what we've just been talking about around the work that we do on the spirit side of things. And that work is pushing the boundaries of how we make the spirit to explore the different flavor expressions that you can get within the spirit alone. And for this one specifically, we have kept the cask proportions exactly the same as Nc'nean Organic that we have just tried. And the only thing that has changed is the yeast. So, Andrew, you mentioned earlier that we have two spirit recipes. We actually
Mhm.
kind of have three. We have two permanent
Oh,
ones, and then we have slots every year where we make other spirit, and those are our experiments. And those
Cool.
experiments, their kind of spiritual home, if you like, is within the Huntress series, and we'll taste two of those tonight, which are quite different. So Huntress Lemon Meadow was made with an extra yeast, and that is a yeast derived from champagne production. Now, why do we do this? So my observation coming into whiskey, slightly as an outsider, but as someone who loved beer, and in particular someone who loved craft beer, was that craft brewers spend a lot of time talking about yeast. And that is for good reason. It's because yeast creates a lot of flavour. And as whiskey distillers, we are really brewers that add a couple more steps to the end of the process. And that fermentation stage, which we've already been talking about, is absolutely key to flavour creation and development. So Jim had already introduced this idea of using two yeasts. Most distillers in the Scotch industry only use one kind of commercialised yeast, which has been developed to maximise yield. And I guess I combined that with my thinking about craft beer and how much they focused on yeast to think, well, why don't we try other yeasts as well? And when I said that Jim Swan wouldn't have approved of bits of what we're doing, this is one of the bits that he wouldn't have approved of. And that is because he felt that he had nailed the only two yeasts that a Scotch distiller needed, which is Anchor and Fermentis. And those are the two yeasts that we use for Nc'nean Organic. But I think life is too short just to stick with two yeasts. So every year we do one or two yeast experiments. We occasionally do other things as well, and I'll come back to that. Most of the time we take a couple of new yeasts. And the first thing, we trial a broad range of yeasts, and we trial it just to make small amounts of wash. That's the process. That's the kind of the strong beer that we get after fermentation, but we don't distill it. But we taste the wash and see whether we think it's delicious. And the ones that we like, we scale up to the distillery and we do for 2 weeks. And what is very interesting about Lemon Meadow is that it's one of our first ever yeast experiments. So using this yeast derived from champagne production, it was distilled in 2017, so our first year of production, when Gordon, our distillery manager, who we'll talk a bit more about later, still thought I was absolutely crazy for making him use yet another yeast. He had come from Diageo, where he was used to these things arriving in tankers and not paying any attention to them. And the great thing about this is that aside from some age difference, it's probably 2 years older than Nc'nean Organic. The only difference is the yeast. The casks are the same, and you can taste the difference that yeast makes. Now, no prizes for guessing. Lemon Meadow, the name comes from the flavour. It's super citrusy. It's lovely and floral, but it's still got that kind of butteriness, that oiliness, that mouthfeel, which hopefully we'll find through the range of Nc'nean as we go through it.
Yeah, I mean, it took a little while for my nose to start to pick it out, but it is very citrusy, like lots of like jujubes, wine gums kind of notes to it. Yeah, like a bit subtle. And what are we talking ABV here? We're still like a little higher,
48.5. So it is
2.5%
higher than Nc'nean Organic.
But it seems quite a bit like it's quite a bit richer, like right off the bat. And as you're saying, the cask recipe is the same. So really the major difference there is just the yeast, which is fascinating.
Yeah. Also, it seems like the bourbon comes through a lot more in this respect as well. And I think like right off the bat, you could tell that this is an older spirit as well. Like it really shines through the hint more maturity. To your point too, like you said, like at first it didn't really maybe when we first poured it, it didn't really come across quite so citrusy. No. So I was like, well, I gotta ask about the name, right? And then as you started mentioning, as you started talking about it, Annabelle, I started nosing again. I was like, oh, I don't have that question anymore. It's not there.
Yeah. Brilliant.
But it reminds me too, like, so speaking of beer, there was a very popular hop variety that was being used in like the mid-teens to late teens called Lemon Drop. And it was like, it always exhibited more like, it was like lemon with a lot of leafy greens around it, like leafy herby greens. And this comes across a lot like that to me.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that, we have these elements already in our spirit. It's not a complete departure. It's just bringing some elements that we already have in Nc'nean more to the fore.
Yeah, it's really jacked up the citrus for sure. It's funny. There's not a lot of distilleries that do this, but I love this story I don't know if you've met Alex Chasko, who's the distiller at Teeling, but he's an American guy
No, I
making
haven't.
whiskey in Dublin. He's a fascinating guy. And he had an assistant that was driving him crazy. So he's like, I got to give him a project so that he'll stop asking me questions. So he's like, go out and buy 10 5-gallon pails, find 10 different strains of yeast, and then mix it with some of our wash, and then pick out the three that are the fruitiest, and then come and tell me once you've done all this. And it was like, how can I make this guy, like, get him out of my hair for 2 or 3 days? And this thing, which just was like a make work project, they discovered this South African wine yeast called papaya
Papaya.
juice. Yeah, and they just that has now become part of their recipe because it was literally just like I got to get this guy off my back for a couple days. But in the end, they discovered this one yeast was like, oh wow, this creates an incredible spirit.
Sounds like
Yeah,
the new name
exactly.
for a huntress.
Yeah,
Huntress papaya
Papaya.
absolutely.
juice. I
Go out
love
and
that.
find some of that papaya juice, just South African yeast.
Well,
So,
you know what's also really interesting is that in the time since we started doing, when we first, I vividly remember in 2017 when I was trying to source some interesting yeast that we could experiment with. When we called our suppliers up, they were like, oh, we don't really do that. We can't really send you sample packs, can't really do small quantities. What do you want them for anyway?
yeah.
And now there are yeast companies approaching us in the UK and they've gone all cool and funky and they've got great names like papaya juice and banana split and so on.
Yeah.
And it's really becoming a thing and people don't look at us like we're crazy anymore, which is wonderful to see.
Yeah. Well, I think again, and as you said, like it's not the only thing that's key to making a good whiskey, but I truly
No.
think it's been neglected by most distillers for a long time for commercial reasons. And when you think about like what distilling does, it can shape the flavors that are there, but it doesn't create new ones. It's just refining what you've already created. And if you don't have something interesting to start with, there's not a lot that you can do with your stills that's going to make it better.
I literally say that all the time, Andrew. It's
Yeah.
like I have taken the words out of your mouth. That is why fermentation is so key.
Hmm.
Distillation is a purification process. It's not a flavor
Hmm.
creation process. Yes, it shapes the
Yeah.
flavors, but if you haven't created it in fermentation, you're not going to get it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's totally key.
All right. Before we move on to the next whiskey, let's talk a little bit about the distillery name, because I know that Nc'nean was not the original name. You had a different name for it before. And I don't know if this ties into it, but I remember in the early days when I heard about your distillery, I mean, there was a lot of new distilleries opening. It was probably somewhat sexist in the way that people were talking about it, but it was a female-led distillery, and that was novel about it. And the name that you've settled on now is I believe, a witch. It's a famous. So the story behind the name and how you got to that point, I'm really fascinated to hear
Okay, great. So it wasn't the original name, although the original name was merely a working name. We were called
it.
Drimnin when we first, like,
Yeah.
when we were raising money and building, but that was just a placeholder, if you like. It's the name of the tiny, tiny, tiny village of 50 people that we're situated in. And honestly, while we were raising money and building, I didn't have time to think about a name. So that was why we had a placeholder. But once we were actually in production, I figured we better come out and tell the world what we were
Hmm.
about, and that required us to have a name. So I wasn't terribly keen to have a name that was just the place that kind of felt a bit like what everyone else did, but I also
Hmm.
felt like we had more to say about what we were trying to do. And so we looked elsewhere for inspiration, including looking back in the Scottish history books. And
Hmm.
we found actually a goddess, but I will explain why she's also a witch. We found
Okay.
a Scottish goddess called Nc'nean, and this was a pagan goddess, so pre-Christian times, um, called Nc'nean. She was known for two things: as a protector of nature and for walking her own path. And we thought that so neatly summed up what we did that I wanted her to represent us. But the other nice things about Nc'nean are that she was known as the Queen of Spirits. Now, in pagan times, that meant spirits in the sense of little elves and nymphs running around on the forest floor,
Right.
but of course it has a very nice read over to whiskey. Um, and the other interesting thing about her is that niche or nook is the female equivalent of Mook. So MacDonald means son of Donald, a very common Scottish
Oh.
surname. Nook means daughter of, but is very rarely used unless you are Irish, where everyone knows exactly what Nook means because they actually use it in their language in their day to day.
Mhm.
But there was one problem with Nc'nean, which is that it's 13 letters long, largely consonants, completely unpronounceable, unreadable, and definitely not typable by me 13 times a day. So we needed to find a shorter version. So we shortened it down to Nc'nean, and the apostrophe after the C in Nc'nean just symbolizes the fact that we have compressed this much longer word into
Yeah.
Nc'nean. But what is interesting, if you're interested in religious history, is that the pagan goddesses became witches in Christian times. So the
Yeah.
Christian movement kind of, you know, made a lot of the pagan goddesses into witches, so Nc'nean became Nc'nean and known as a witch.
There you go. No, that's
So there,
fascinating. I
there
mean,
you go.
and it's a lot more than you can get in just a quick snippet online. But I mean, I think that's fascinating because I had no idea that there was a feminized version of like daughter of like that's not something
I know.
that's ever come out. So I mean, then this kind of leads into it. But like, um, was part of this a big part of this for you? Um, as a woman leading a Scotch company, was it a big part of this to kind of try to open up more space for that because it was such, or was that even part of the vision?
Um,
Because it was such like, let's be honest, 20 years ago it was a very male dominated industry. That's
yeah.
changed enormously now, which is great, but it kind of seems like that
Um,
that was a small part of this.
well, what was a really and still is actually a really important part of Nc'nean to me is getting more people drinking whiskey. But
Hmm.
it was, especially to begin with, it was not about men and women. And honestly, I mean, I had been lucky enough to come into the whiskey industry really not having to worry too much about being a woman in the workspace. I come from a
Hmm.
very equitable, relaxed place. I came into whiskey sort of assuming the same. I mean, actually, there've always been loads of
Hmm.
women working in the industry, and whilst historically it's not been perceived as such from the outside, it's always been
Hmm.
much, I think, much better on the inside than people maybe have assumed from the outside. Um, so, I mean, perhaps naively, it honestly didn't really cross my mind until we went public, and this was kind of in 2017 once we started production, and people started commenting on it. And I thought, that's interesting. They're all commenting on it. And they would say things like, but do you actually like whiskey? And you think, you wouldn't ask me that if I was a man. Like, I've already spent 4 years of my life on
No.
this. I've not even produced a drop. Um,
Yeah.
so that, I guess, got me thinking, well, maybe we do have a problem here if I'm being asked
Yeah.
these questions. So I have become more thoughtful and more active in trying to change that perception. But
Hmm.
I would say specifically women in whiskey was not a big part of why I started Nc'nean.
Hmm.
More people in whiskey or in
Yeah.
particular, just, there is a typical whiskey drinker, and trying to expand Scotch beyond that is just still really, really
Yeah.
important to me. And there's still a lot of work to do, but it's not really a gender thing. It
Yeah.
wasn't a gender
Well,
thing originally. Now it's become a little bit more important, but still not really. It's a perception thing, and that's the problem because
right.
there's loads of women who drink whiskey.
Of course. And I mean, well, Sean and I, one of our colleagues, I mean, it's better now, but like our main spirits buyer is a woman and she's there. And there have been a handful of times where people are like, well, what can you possibly know? You're a woman. And the second I hear that, I absolutely lose my shit. I know we said we weren't going to swear, Chris, but I'm sorry. Um,
It wasn't
but
a big
We're
swear word, to be
37
fair.
minutes
no,
in, it's fine.
but I think the reason this is interesting to me is because I remember all the early talk about your distillery, like in the press, seemed to focus on that one fact. And now looking like several years later, it's not, I mean, maybe they've moved on from it, but it was interesting at the time. And that's why it was curious to me. But I do have to say, like, regardless of that, your brand does have a feminine touch to it, which is unique. Your bottles, everything your design, it's refreshing and it's different. And I think there's probably some risk in that, but at the same time, it sets it apart.
Exactly. And I think there's so many things to unpick in there, but I mean, that's the value of diversity, full stop, right? Is that people think differently. And so if, there aren't really any new distilleries that have been started recently by a woman. So one that is, you're probably going to get something different, as you get with any other kind of diversity. And
Sure.
And I also agree with you about the risk, but I think in a world of whiskey, which is quite crowded, it's probably more risky to do something that's the same as everyone else, especially if you're a new company, you haven't got as deep pockets as everyone else. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't feel, when you're doing it, quite scary sometimes, but I think ultimately doing something different is, well, it's what gets me up in the morning still and what excites me as well. So I think if we're doing the same as everyone else, I would have given up an awfully long time ago.
That's fair. All right. Well, we should probably keep this rolling. Move on to the
Yes.
second whiskey, sticking with the Huntress range for Orchard
Yes.
Cobbler.
I'm very excited about this one. I'm also a bit sad because it's the one that I found I didn't have at home, and it's one of my favorite Nc'neans that we've ever released. So, Andrew, you mentioned earlier that we have two different spirit recipes that we make in the distillery, aside from the yeast trials. 80% of what we distill in a year is our normal spirit recipe, and that's what I described at the beginning, and that's what's in Nc'nean Organic. But when Jim Swan came to visit the distillery in February 2017, very shortly before we started distilling, Gordon, my distillery manager, and I sat down with him. We had a day-long session, and we talked through absolutely everything, much of which we've already talked about tonight. And he said, this spirit recipe will make a great young whiskey. And I was like, great. What if we want to make a great old whiskey as well? And he said, oh, well, you wouldn't make it like that. You would make it like this. So whilst he never knew that we were going to do this, I ran with this idea and decided that we should make these two spirit recipes, one designed for short maturation and one designed for long maturation. Now, as far as I know, we're the only distillery that does this, and it really literally came from this one day of meeting with Jim Swan. And there are multiple tweaks we make through the spirit recipe, but the fundamentally important difference between those two recipes is the cut points on the spirit run. So if you think of a spirit run as a rainbow of flavor, and if you want to get really geeky and chemistry-like about this, the spirit still heats up and the lighter elements evaporate at lower temperatures because they are lighter, and the heavier elements take more heat to evaporate later. So it's very predictable what elements and thus flavors you get over at each stage of the run. So if you like, you're a painter looking at this rainbow of flavor, and you can say, I want these 2 colors or these 4 colors, and pick them out based on where you make the cuts. So the theory of the short maturation recipe that we talked about before is you get the lighter, purer, fruity flavors over first, and that's what you're looking to capture. The theory of the long maturation recipe is that you capture a broader range of flavors that makes potentially a slightly less delicious new make off the bat, in that you've got some less pure, more funky flavors in the new make to begin with. But over 10 plus years in cask, that funk develops into depth and complexity. Now, we are not tasting that long maturation recipe tonight. It will only come out as a 10 plus year old, which is at least a year and a half, more like 2 years away for us. But what we are tasting is a very interesting side result from making these two recipes. So when we shift onto the long maturation recipe, our cut points move down, and all those fruity flavors that come high up in the run are no longer being captured and put into casks. And we do this recipe for about 6 weeks a year. And when we switch back off this recipe, back onto our short maturation recipe, we were finding the spirit was different, not different permanently, but different for a week or so. And we could also see this in the analysis we were getting done on the spirit. And I scratched my head and I asked Tatlock and Thompson, who do our spirit analysis, and I quizzed Gordon about what he was doing different in this week. And he said, nothing, I promise, nothing. It's all the same. And what we eventually figured out is that those really fruity flavors that come over early in the run and were not being captured on the long maturation run are obviously recycled. That's what we do with the heads and tails that we don't capture. That's how Scotch distilleries work. They all go back into the low wines and feints tank. But of course, these lovely fruity flavors were being given 6 weeks to build up and up and up in concentration in this tank. And then when we switched the cut points back to allow them out, they all came flooding out in 1 week. So this very special week became known to us as the cutover week or the in-between weeks. And we kept this spirit kind of marked and separate in the warehouse. And Huntress Orchard Cobbler is the first time we released this spirit into the world. And it would be fair to say that I had been itching to release this since 2017. But as you've just heard, it's quite a complicated story to explain. So we felt like that probably wasn't the one to lead with when we launched. So we waited a little bit. And I think, I mean, again, Orchard Cobbler, you'll have guessed it, but that is meant to be a symbolism of the taste. It's really super fruity, which for the exact reasons I've just described. It's got this lovely bready bakedness to it, that kind of cobbler feel. And it also, which is not referenced in the Orchard Cobbler name, has this really interesting hint of peppermint, which I think is very unusual in a Scotch.
Yeah, it's got a lovely palate, lovely profile. Yeah, I mean, once again, I think what you've got there is a scenario that cannot be summed up quickly or easily. And the only kind of parallel I can draw to that was the period when Clynelish stopped being Clynelish because they'd lost their waxiness. They couldn't figure out why it was. And then it turned out it was all about the spirits receiver, and someone had cleaned the spirits receiver, and the gunk in the trunk was what gave Clynelish that profile that they were looking for. But what's fascinating to me is that how quickly you guys found this. I mean, this is something that could have very easily gotten lost in your production for years before you realized what was happening.
Exactly. Absolutely. And I think, the other thing I love about it is this wasn't planned. This did come out of doing things differently and taking a different approach, but that different approach was meant to give us a great 10-year-old, which hopefully it still will, by the way. But, something else came out of it as well. And that's what I love about this doing things differently approach and experimenting and seeing what happens. It does continue to make Gordon very nervous. And this summer, we did some super, super, super long fermentations. And we'd had this planned in for quite a long time, because doing super long fermentations, by which I mean 2 weeks, is a complete headache from a production scheduling point of view. So I had given Gordon a full 6 months of warning that this is what we were going to do. And I live in London, but I go to the distillery about once a month. And every time I got to the distillery, Gordon was waiting for me with another worry about how these long fermentations were going to work. But he gamely did them anyway. And we now have the spirit. It's not really spent any time in cask yet, but it's really cool and different and delicious. And yeah, it's a great joy to just continue doing these different experiments and seeing where they lead.
I mean, I
Sean,
have to
any
say that
comment?
I absolutely love the Huntress range, because it's so, I mean, Andrew, Sean, and everyone here, you'll know, there's a lot of whiskies out there. You hear so many stories, and it's really hard to find something new. And just the fact that it takes 5 minutes to explain Orchard Cobbler, I love that. It's almost like you have to earn it. You have to earn the right to taste this whiskey and actually figure out why it tastes like it does. And I love that. And I love this sense of, just finding these new flavors, and you're like, why is that in there? And, there's all these new reasons. And, going back to what you were saying, Andrew, earlier about, the things that people know about Nc'nean, the organic, the female found, the sustainability. But I think one of the things that we don't get a chance to talk enough about is just how, how much work we do on the liquid itself and the experimentation around that. And this has been one of my aha moments in, my last year of working for Nc'nean. I think it's something like this I just find fascinating.
Yeah. Sean, any
So
thoughts?
yeah, okay. So that very cool story. I got a couple things. First, Gurpreet, who runs the Anoka, so there's a distillery 3 hours north of us who does like peated single malt in a shamelessly Scottish style. Very, very good. Like probably some of my favorite in Canada. He described to me the exact same phenomena, but with his peated spirit. And it's like towards the end of his season where there's certain qualities of the heads and tails that it builds up, and the intensities of certain qualities of that peat start building up until some of his final runs. And I don't know if I get to try them or not. And I can't remember exactly the notes that he's talking about, but that's really cool. That's like yeah, very cool.
That's
And
really
then
cool.
Similarity.
yeah, and then okay, and then second, I'm curious about what's the warehouse setup you have. Are you running like is it like dunnage style or is it racks?
Nope, it is all dunnage. And actually, Andrew, we talked about some pictures earlier, and I haven't managed to
Yeah,
share any
let's
of
see
them.
some photos.
So maybe this is a good time.
Yeah, well, while you look at that or for that, like, because I was getting this slight hint of like old leaf mulch or something on here, and it's almost and it's strange, like
mm,
it's barely perceptibly there, but it's kind of on the I don't know on the like the bottom end of the palette, and I was kind of wondering if this is maybe
Yeah.
anything to do with it.
Well, I'm getting this like kind of brioche note from it, but what I love is there's almost the fruit reminds me of like young cognac, like a young
mm.
um
Mm.
but I don't know what it is about it, but there's something about it that just reminds me of like really bright young cognac notes.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of Nc'nean that you can describe as bright. I think that's quite a Nc'nean style. But the fruit that you get from the cognac is absolutely enhanced by this specific
Hmm.
kind of crossover week, if you like.
Hmm. Yeah.
Can you guys see this?
Yep,
Has the screen sharing worked? Have you got a dunnage warehouse on your screens? Great.
we
So
do.
this does not look like this anymore, by the way. This is our new warehouse, which is now chock full of casks. But yeah, we store almost everything on site in traditional dunnage 3 high. There was a stage where this warehouse, which is our new one, wasn't built in time. So at that point, we started storing a few casks in Glasgow. And I then figured out that was actually rather a good idea, because if the worst were to happen to our warehouses on site, we might have a little bit of whiskey left elsewhere. So we now have a policy of storing a small portion off site, but the vast majority is on site. But while I've got these pictures open, why don't I also show you what the distillery looks like, which is
Oh, yeah.
this. So it's in a very traditional, what we call a steading in Scotland. So this is actually an old farm building. They were often built in a U shape, but they're not very useful for modern farming because you can't get tractors or hay bales or anything else in through the very small doors. So that was one of the things that made it so perfect to make a distillery, to create a distillery in. And we didn't mention this either, but we're right up on the west coast. We're in the Highlands. We're just opposite the Isle of Mull. We can see Tobermory from the distillery, but it is very, very, very remote. It's about 3.5 to 4 hours drive from Glasgow. You come through the beauty of Glencoe, which is here. You cross a ferry called Corran, which is here. You drive down a single track road, and the single track road then ends. And if you don't stop, you end up in the sea. But if you take the correct right turn, you will end up on this beautiful track, which you drive for 1.5 miles on. You then pass this little barrel that says nearly there, keeps your faith going. And 5 minutes later, you get to the distillery, which many people would say does feel like the end of the world. But it is a very, very beautiful place to have a distillery. This is the view out our still house windows. You can see the Isle of Mull opposite. And this is an aerial view. So this is the U-shaped stone steading. You can see the warehouses up on the hill here. There's a building here just off screen that you can't see, which is our bottling building. That's where we do all of our bottling. This is our cooling pond, which gives us our cold water. This is Tobermory just over here. This is Ardnamurchan. So this point here is the most westerly point in the mainland of the UK. And somewhere way over here is Canada and North America.
Yeah. Well, I've been close. I've been to Ardnamurchan, which was a bit of a trek to get to, but next time I'll have to make make my way towards Nc'nean. Now you mentioned before that this is your family's land. It's a
Yes.
farm. And I mean, I don't think that this is the case here, but like the interesting thing to me is the origins of the Scotch whiskey industry going back 150, 200 years is all those distilleries would have started as farms. And one of the byproducts of raising cattle is that you don't want to give them raw barley, but if you make beer or whiskey with the barley first, it then creates a great animal feed to give them that's high in protein that they're happy to eat. So I'm just curious what kind of farm your family has there because like, are you growing barley there? I know there's not a lot of barley grown on the west coast of
No,
Scotland.
sadly, we are not growing barley, and for that exact reason, we're on the west
Yeah.
coast and it is very wet and soggy, and that makes a terrible barley growing environment. However, we have sheep, and more importantly, we have cows, and they do indeed eat our draff. So all of the
Lovely.
spent grains from the distilling process goes to our cows on site, which
Mhm.
is perfect. So we don't have to take it anywhere, and they are very happy eating it. We source our barley from the East Coast, largely from two separate farms. But all of our barley has always been 100% Scottish and 100% organic.
Oh, lovely. Well, let's move on to the first of the Quiet Rebels. We've got Gordon.
Yes.
So tell us about
Perfect.
Gordon and the Quiet Rebels series as well.
Exactly. Well, I've actually told you quite a lot about Gordon already and his having to put up with me throwing all these random ideas at him. So let me explain the Quiet Rebel series first. So this is the other limited edition that we release. It comes out every autumn in the UK, and it is all about celebrating our people. So every whiskey that we release in the Quiet Rebel series does two things. It tells the story of the person in whose name it is, but it is also a whiskey made to their taste. So the process for a Quiet Rebel starts about a year before it's released. And by the way, you get your turn to have a Quiet Rebels depending on how long you've been in the company. So there's a list of people. And the earlier you join, the more chance you have of getting up the top of that list. So
Chris, you're
about a
going to be
year.
waiting a while, buddy.
I know.
I'm 2034 at the moment. So order your palate now, Andrew. It's going to be absolutely delicious.
Well, you're going to have some older whiskeys to work with. It might not be fair by that point.
I know. It's going to be worth the wait. I may have to push a couple of colleagues down the stairs just to get it a bit earlier.
Of course.
I know this is the thing. What behaviour does the Quiet Rebel series encourage? You could either say it encourages people to stay at Nc'nean for a long time, or it could encourage assassination of other colleagues, depending on your viewpoint.
Well, you're close to Glencoe, so betrayal is kind
Exactly.
of in the
There's a-
DNA of the area.
There's a lot
Absolutely.
of steep, a lot of steep, craggy crevasses down there, Andrew. So
And very few
team
people
building
around to
trip.
witness it either.
Yeah.
So the process for creating a Quiet Rebels whiskey starts about a year before it's due to come out, and our blender Matt sits down with whose ever turn it is and tries to extract from them what they like about whiskey. And this is variously either easy or hard for Matt, depending on the person whose turn it is. Now, Gordon is our distillery manager. He was not quite our first employee. That was Lorna, who's now one of our distillers, but he joined in early 2017 and was part of that meeting with Jim Swan that I've talked about in February of 2017. Gordon is a typical Scot. He originally comes from the East Coast, but he completely fell in love with the West Coast of Scotland. He spent 25 years working for Diageo, and has done all sorts of really interesting roles there, including being a coppersmith, and also in the maintenance team, but eventually found his home in distilling. He fell in love with the West Coast and ended up at Oban Distillery, which, whilst it is 2 hours away, we consider one of our closest neighbours because there's not much else between us and Oban. And in 2016, when we were looking for a distillery manager, I was lucky enough to be introduced to Gordon by Brendan McCarran, who said that he was the best distiller he'd ever had at Oban. And coincidentally, at the same time, Gordon was thinking that 25 years was probably enough at Diageo and maybe he was ready for his next adventure, but he absolutely was not going to leave the West Coast. So we kind of came along just at the right time. I always think that Gordon was unbelievably brave to join the company because he came up to the distillery before it was completed. Most of the important vessels were not yet plumbed together. We didn't have a website. We didn't have a name. It was just me and Bennett, who's our chairman, sat in a house telling him what our plans were. And for some reason, he got on board with this vision and agreed to join us. So Gordon has had a hand in every single bottle of Nc'nean that we have ever released. And when Matt sat down with him to try and figure out what he might like in his Quiet Rebel series, he gave a typically short Gordon-like reply, which was, I like whiskies that are tasty, tasty. So Matt then had to figure out what on earth Gordon meant by tasty, tasty. And where Matt got to, but I'm not sure Gordon ever expressed it exactly, was that Gordon veers towards that kind of more sherried, more heavily cask influenced kind of whiskey. And so what we have in Quiet Rebels Gordon is a more actually unusual style for Nc'nean, but that's also part of the joy of the Quiet Rebels series, is that we really do genuinely follow what our team want rather than, you know, we're not dictating it from the center, if you like. So this is 74% STR cask, 19% sherry, and 7% Rive Salt, which is a sweet French wine. So it's much darker than other Nc'neans. It's got a much heavier cask influence. You can taste the sherry, unlike in Nc'nean Organic. But, you know, it's still ultimately made with our spirit and put in our cask. So you still get that butteriness, some of that fruity elegance.
This is a bit of a cheeky question, but you think Gordon wanted this style because after 25 years at Diageo, he was tired of fourth fill casks? I mean, there's a place for fourth fill casks. No, I know there are, but like Diageo Canada is useless. They don't care. No, I mean,
comment.
I like that style of whiskey after 20, 30 years, but in a young whiskey, it's not great. And it's purely just a joke. But I mean, yeah, that's not really their style of distillate. A lot of it is, I mean, if I'm being honest, a lot of it at a young age is quite boring. So it's very safe, it's very boring, and this is not safe or boring.
Exactly. And I think I think Matt nailed it. It's definitely tasty, and Gordon gave it his seal of approval.
What's surprising to me again, like maybe there's something different about the STR casks that you're sourcing than what we're used to. Because again, Sean, this is majority STR. And if you blinded this, would you guess this was STR cask?
No, I actually, it's funny. Like I start to feel even over the last little bit that this, like the spirit, maybe I'm getting a bit of a feel for it. But I mean, yeah, like on the nose, you get a bit more. I think the sherry is more noticeable on the nose. Like I think I could say that. But again, yeah, it's not like it screams STR or anything like that. The finish on this is like super juicy too. It's like peach mango and a lot of pepper on it. Like it's cool.
So creamy, so buttery. I mean, the oils, it's got a nice fattiness to it. Yeah, I mean, this is what's crazy is like, I think, you know, when we think STR, I think like Cavalan Vino, which is massively dark and just so over the top. And then we look at other places like Kilholman. You know, I could think I'm falling short here, like Lindor's Abbey, other places that use STR, and their STRs just seem very different. They're darker, and I like this better because I don't love that like really dark, young, tannic profile. And it seems like whatever you're doing with your STRs, they seem to be different.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm going to go and investigate this because I don't actually have an immediate answer as to why they might be. I mean, clearly the spirit will be different, so that's the most obvious factor. I mean, Catalan's STRs, they make themselves. I know that. So our
Yeah.
sourcing of the STRs are absolutely different, and they are not using Spanish red wine to start them off. So
Mhm.
that's an obvious difference. But with something like Lindor's, I don't know where they're getting them from, but wouldn't surprise me if it's exactly the same cooperage. Kilhoman, you've got Peter Spirit, that always interacts in a different way. So I guess that's not directly comparable.
Mhm.
Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, otherwise
I
I don't actually have an answer.
no. Well, that's okay. I mean, I think that's part of the magic of whiskey is that some things are just unknowable. Maybe they're unknowable in the short term, maybe permanently.
Yeah,
But it just, I think
exactly.
I get, and I don't know if Sean feels the same way. We haven't declared this, Annabelle. We do a lot of tastings. Many of the people who are on this tasting will have heard this many times before. I have an unconscious bias against wine casks, not STR, but against wine casks, and it's because I find most wine casks. Maybe it's because they're not treated properly, they're not rinsed. I don't know what it is, but a lot of them I don't like, and I don't like it from the moment I put my nose to it. STR is a little different, and yeah, this is a surprise to me because when I see STR, I don't get excited all the time. It's not something that, it's not always a selling feature to me, I guess is what I want to say. But with everything that we've had so far that's got in here, it doesn't have any of those hallmarks that turn me off of it in other producers.
And I think, yeah, I mean, I think STR casks are, if you are a real spirit lover and maybe even a real whiskey lover, and often I think the bourbon cask can be more interesting. That is what I would choose. Um, and I think you just get more to play with there. And I think whatever STR cask you're using, you probably are get less interest
Mhm.
and things to go back to. Um, However, there are lots of people out there who actively prefer STR cast, and we did a lot of work, which is very fun, um, before we launched Nc'nean. So this was in 2019 to test lots of different whiskies with more STR, with less STR, pure STR, no STR. And pretty much whatever we tested, we discovered that half of the people like one and half of the people like the other. So I
Right.
think that's also the joy of whiskey is that, you can, there are lots of people prefer lots of different things. I'm intrigued by your point about wine casks, Andrew. Is that all wine casks or red wine casks? Would you count sweet wine
Um,
in there, for example?
it's predominantly red wine casks. I don't.
Me too.
s-
I'm
s-
not a fan of red wine
Yeah.
casks. I actually love sweet wine casks, but red wine
There
not so
there
keen on.
have been exceptions to the rule, and I don't know why they worked, but by and large, um, yeah, I I mean Sean can attest to this. Like I think we're known, like some of our importers know this. Like if you come to us like, I got this cool Pinot Noir cask, I'm gonna be like, I need to try it before I'm agreeing to bring it into the store
Mm,
because right off the bat, I don't think it's going to be good. And a lot of the time, I think it's the case. It's not good. I don't know what's going on. I think some producers are, some, and especially independent bottlers that'll use them for either maturation or finishing.
mm,
Some seem to do a better job than others with it, and I don't know what the reasoning is behind that. Sweet wine's good, but I think anytime you have wine, there's the risk of the cask spoiling before it's
yeah,
filled. And
yeah.
I think that's the biggest problem. The bigger issue is there's some people that are blatantly just wet filling it. So there's still wine in there, and then they're dumping the
Mm,
whiskey in, which technically shouldn't be legal, like because you've now got an additive in your spirit.
yeah,
Um, and I think the same is true of sherry. I don't like wet fill sherry casks.
yeah,
I don't think that's
yeah,
a great way to make whiskey either. It's a great
yeah,
way to make dark whiskey, but yeah, um, like you, I love bourbon casks. I think that's the purest way to see spirit because it's clean. Um, I think your STR usage, to be honest, I'm really impressed by because uh, yeah, we don't need to go on about this much further because my experience is that a lot of it is just it's hiding young whiskey with
yeah,
a lot
yeah,
of wood.
exactly, exactly. And I think it got that reputation early on as well, which hasn't helped. But I'm with you on
Mhm.
Redcast. We have not a single red wine cask, apart from the STR ones, which I consider different, but we have not a single red wine cask in the Nc'nean warehouse.
Yeah.
We do have a lot of sweet wine casks, though, including the 7% Reef Salt, which is in this Quiet Rebels Gordon.
Yeah.
I always find I find it's a bit of a gamble with like red sweet wines or like not like actually no, maybe even all. Like I think I've had really good ones and I've had like whatever. I feel like well yeah, as Andrew mentioned, red wine in general being kind of iffy. I feel if it's long-term maturation, it has a better chance of being something a little bit nicer than if it's just a finish.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
but sometimes the stars align. Like and Andrew, we were in Bowmore where it was like
Yeah.
Bordeaux
The best
cask,
whiskey in the
sherry
warehouse
cask,
was the Bordeaux cask.
and we looked at each other. Yeah, and she's like, "Oh,
Interesting.
really? Is that
I
what
was
they
angry.
think?"
It was like, this can't be true. This feels wrong.
But it works. And then I guess to speak to your point with sweet wine, I think it can be situational in there too. Like I personally feel that Sauternes and peat go very, very, very well together. But I don't necessarily like Sauternes with non-peated whiskey. I don't know what it is. It's just something about it together. So I think I don't know. I don't think there's a one rule for everything.
But Sean, I guess, and this is sort of Annabelle touched on this, and we talk about this when we're picking casks. There's a difference between what we like and what we think the consumer's going to like. And those are two things that we often have to distinguish with. So as a business, you can't just do what you want to do. We do a lot of that, but you also have to give people to a certain extent what they want. And that's a fine line at times as a business.
And we have the same battles, Andrew.
Yeah. All right, we should move on to Amy's bottling here, the Quiet Rebels Amy.
So, Quiet Rebels Amy, I'm going to tell you what's in this first, and then I'll tell you why. So, Quiet Rebels Amy was bottled last year, so 2024. This is 63% STR, 18% bourbon, and 19% Mohi. And for those of you that don't know what Mohi is, it is a fortified sweeter wine, kind of like port, if you like. I mean, it's not that close to it, but it's a good simile. But the interesting thing about these Mohi casks is they are actually oxidized white Mohi. It is not red Mohi. You can also get red Mohi like port, but these are oxidized white Mohi casks. So really unusual. And why did we end up with this very unusual combination? Well, Amy started working for us in 2018, and she is the first and only person to have ever reached the distillery by public transport. And if any of you ever come, you'll understand just how difficult that is. And it involved her flagging down the school bus, which in Scotland is technically public transport because it's put on by the government, to get the last 11 miles down the road. And she then had to walk a mile down the track to get to the distillery. And basically, it didn't matter what she said in the interview, because I thought, if you've managed to get here by public transport from Glasgow, 3.5 hours away, you deserve a job. Anyway, Amy started off as our visitor manager, but she is incredibly passionate about sustainability, and she wove that into her visitor manager role. But as time went on, she kind of moved into a sustainability role in Nc'nean. And when it came her turn to have her Quiet Rebels release, she was a much trickier customer for Matt than Gordon had been. So Matt went from tasty from Gordon to a very complex brief from Amy, which went something along the lines of, I really like port finished whiskey. I know we haven't got any port barrels in the warehouse, but I also want my Quiet Rebels to have a specific sustainability story against it, because that is my role, which is fair enough. However, if you've kind of already done everything you can possibly think of to make your whiskey as sustainable as possible, that is quite tricky to achieve. But what we came up with was alighting on a cask that was from a particularly sustainable producer. And that is actually something that is hard for us to achieve across our whole warehouse. And so this felt like a very nice thing to focus on for Amy's release. So the Mohi producer, who sold us the barrels for Amy's release, is called Clos de l'Origine. And they are a winery who also make this Mohi sweet wine. And they are very, very aligned with us in the sense that they're very focused on sustainability across all aspects of their operations. So everything they make is organic certified. The vineyard is actually farmed biodynamically. They practice agroforestry and so on. They're a tiny, tiny producer. We actually came across them through the cask broker that we use in Glasgow, but we then got in contact with them directly, and they were so delighted that someone was using their casks in a whiskey. They sent us bottles of this oxidized white Mohi so we could try the original product that had been in the cask. And indeed, it is very port-like in its flavor. So the product is Quiet Rebels Amy. I think it's got lovely sweetness, as you would expect from that use of Mohi. It's kind of orangey to me. I think for me, it's very orange marmalade. It's got some of that bitterness or texture that you think of from marmalade as well. But it's also got lots of kind of lovely butteriness and breadiness. And
Yeah. It's quite decadent. I mean, and it's got more color than some of the other releases do as well. Yeah, this is quite interesting.
And it was very fun to use such an unusual cask variety as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, you would have obviously have had this cask type in the warehouse maturing,
No, I should have said it is a
or
Mohi
is
finish.
Maury finish?
It is
Okay,
finished.
all right. Well, then that
And
makes
that is, and same with Simon, which we'll come on to next. We use finishes a lot in the Quiet Rebel series because we've only got a year. So we take a combination, and sometimes it's just purely what's in the warehouse, but oftentimes we'll integrate a finishing element, which is what allows us to kind of bespoke it, if you like, for the team member in question. So yeah, this is about a year in Mohi. Ex-bourbon first, then Mohi.
Now, given that you only do one of these a year, I don't know if this is a trade secret or not. What kind of volume are you talking about in terms of bottles? Like how big are these releases of the Quiet Rebel series?
It's definitely not a trade secret. And by the way, you can find as many details as we can possibly give you about every single whiskey we've ever released on our website. So if you go into our website, you can go into the Quiet Rebel series, you can see every bottle we've ever released. You can go into it, you can see the proportion of the cask type, you can see when it was bottled, you can see how many bottles we released. Through the years, they've been between 5,000 and 10,000 bottles, basically, each of them. The Huntress ones are smaller, and that's because we're normally drawing from a smaller stock of casks because they've been, experiments. And yeah, they're just a bit, we're using spirit that is a bit rarer. Quiet Rebels, we like to spread a bit wider and do slightly bigger batches. But it also depends, on the style that we're doing that year and what's possible.
Sean, I'm interested in your take on this because I mean that decadence is lovely. It's a nice layer, but I think it hides a little bit some of the distillate and the fruit, which I guess we've talked about a little bit. I mean, bourbon is probably the cleanest profile to see the distillate behind it. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this one?
I think that this is the first one in the whole series or in the lineup that started hinting towards like an obvious wine note on it, which is not necessarily bad. Like obviously, it's a finish in that wine. I enjoy the viscosity that the wine added to it, and then of course, yeah, Annabelle, you're right. Like there's like that nice generous orangey note, but the slightly more delicate fruity tones. You're right, Andrew. It's covered it up a little bit, but it's kind of brought in a little bit more like, I don't know, like prune syrup and a little bit more of those richer tones to it.
It's a bit oxidative too. I mean, you can kind of see that that profile as well. Yeah, it's lovely. I mean, in some ways, it feels almost older than some of the other whiskeys we've gone through tonight, even though I know it's relatively speaking not that much, but it seems a little more mature on the palate.
Yeah, interesting. And I don't have the full cast ages in front of me, but I don't think it is significantly
No,
more.
I
I mean,
think it's
certainly
actually
the
the
young,
youngest one we're tasting, isn't it, Anna? Isn't it like
it might well be.
more
I mean,
years old?
the youngest
Hmm.
casks in there are 2020. There were some older ones as well, but
Were they? Yeah.
But I
But
think
I
I
mean,
that's
it's
that.
certainly a lot younger than Huntress Lemon Meadow, for example, which is all 2017.
because I
But I
always I
think.
always use this bottling as an example of like just how amazing, whiskeys can taste young. I mean, I remember serving this blind in Germany, and everyone thought it was sort of 10 to 12 years old, which just shows you, the world of age and maturity is
Mhm,
a lot more complex than it used to be. But yeah, the idea of a whether it's four or maybe some older things in there, but just having
mhm.
that sort of age profile and tasting like this, it sort of blows my mind a little bit.
Yeah. No, it is interesting to me, and I think it's got to have something to do with that fortified wine cask
Mm,
element to it. Like it's just
definitely.
adding a bit of mouthfeel and a bit of texture that maybe you'd have to wait longer for in a maturation. Um, just to keep things rolling, because I don't think we told you this at the start, but I know for Sean and I, we have all seven whiskeys in front of us. We like to do a speed round at the end where we go back through to see how things have changed. So,
Love
and
it.
if you have seven glasses, great. If you don't, we'll just riff on it. But let's go on to the Quiet Rebels Simon, which is not in market yet, but this is something that I think will probably be coming in the months ahead.
Great. So Quiet Rebel Simon, yes, this is not in market yet because it only launched last month in the UK. So Simon is one of our distillers. He is got a very interesting background. Like actually all of our distilling team, apart from Gordon, none of them have come from distilling backgrounds before, and we have trained them all up from scratch. Um, that is for lots of different reasons, if you like. But one of the things that we are trying to do at Nc'nean is create these long-term, sustainable, skilled jobs in what is a very remote area of Scotland. And if you're trying to do that, quite often you can't pick experienced people. There is Simon. Look at that. So Simon used to be a chef. And what is interesting about that is it means he has a really excellent palate. And I like to test my team. I haven't done this with you yet, Chris, actually. We'll have to do that
Mm.
next time you're at the distillery.
Ho, 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 ho.
Um, I like to test the team by doing blind nosing tests, where you put some ketchup and mustard in a pot and cover it up with cotton wool and see if they can recognize it. And Simon got absolutely every single one of them right. And that was all because he's a chef and he's used to working with flavor. Anyway, so a year ago when Matt sat down with Simon, he found he had kind of a pretty easy customer because Simon knew exactly what he wanted from his Quiet Rebels series. Um, he said, I love stout cask matured whiskey. And he'd even brought a stout cask matured whiskey with him to this discussion. He was very clear that that's what he wanted. So in some ways that was beautifully clear direction, but it also meant we somehow had to find some stout casks that we could mature Simon's whiskey in. But this actually kicked off a beautiful collaboration. So there is a wonderful cask matured beer company in Scotland called Nc'nean Gun. They're very well known and they make some amazing cask finished beers. So we approached them. We did a little experiment and figured out how our whiskey interacted with beer casks. Beer casks are can make a massive impression in a very short period of time. So part of the reason that we wanted to do this experiment was to kind of time to the day. We're not talking weeks or months here. We're talking about days. How long we wanted to leave this whiskey in the beer cask. So we did our experiment. We figured that about 3 weeks was the right amount of time. And Nc'nean Gun then brewed a special beer, especially for us. It's an oatmeal stout. And we sent a whole load of STR casks down to Nc'nean Gun. They put their oatmeal stout in it for 3 months. Those same STR casks then came back to the distillery and we filled them with STR cask whiskey for 3 weeks only and then bottled it to make Quiet Rebels Simon. It's a really delicious bottling. Matt's unofficial tasting notes for this, which are actually much better than his official tasting notes, I don't know why we didn't use them, are Terry's chocolate orange combined with Bovril. Now, I assume you have Terry's chocolate orange in Canada.
Yeah,
Yes.
at the very least,
good.
we're aware of it. Yes.
Okay. I mean, it's orange chocolate, it's not that complicated. Orange milk chocolate and Bovril, which is, do you have Bovril?
Isn't that like Pepto-Bismol?
No, is it like
Cough syrup or something?
No, you cook with it.
It's like stock. It's like beef stock or something, isn't it?
Oh,
Yeah, you cook with
okay.
it. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like beef stock crossed with Marmite.
Right.
But I mean, it's savory. That's the idea of it. Very savory, basically. But I mean, that makes it sound quite crazy. It doesn't taste quite that crazy, but it is really delicious. And I'm sorry that you guys don't have. Do you have any to taste? Did we send some over?
Oh yeah,
Yes.
no.
Not very...
that's
good.
why we're talking about
they're
it.
feeling guilty. Yes. Sorry that you might not have any yet.
These bottles are not here and didn't get poured.
No, they just appeared. Where from?
I don't know.
They arrived with about 5 minutes to spare, I think, before the deadline had been sent out. Okay. But they arrived.
It's a mystery. They did arrive. Yeah, I think we might have lost Yarka, but she was here earlier.
Yeah, she's here.
She's here.
Is she still here? Oh, okay.
Man, it's shocking how crazy the roasted barley comes out of the nose on this still.
Yeah, it has a little bit of that like Guinness malt kind of, which is the one stout, like the regularly available stout that I can think of.
Absolutely, exactly.
It starts leading into like coffee infused chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
There's a really interesting kind of sugar spice mix on the palate, and like espresso, kind of like a coffee bean, espresso bean sort of note too.
Mm-hmm. It makes an amazing espresso martini, this whiskey.
Oh, interesting. Very cool.
Yes! Oh my God, it's Terry's chocolate orange.
Yeah,
brilliant.
There you go.
Thanks for the props.
Stephen, you have more self-control than I do. If something like that was in my
home,
have you got some
Bovril as well?
Yeah, I would just eat it. No.
Exactly.
So this is probably
unless you're like me and actually hate chocolate orange.
Oh, Annabel, I'm finding out secrets I didn't want to know.
No.
How can anyone not like Terry's chocolate orange?
Oh.
This is kind of like the big contrast for the rest of the lineup so far. Like it is very much I'm not going to say like, well, it's kind of the odd one out, right? Those flavors have definitely cut far to the left of what we've just had.
And isn't it interesting? It was just 3 weeks as well.
3 weeks. Yeah, that's crazy.
Well, I mean, that goes back to the days of Jim McEwen with Murray McDavid and their acing. I suppose Berkladi as well of Cask, where sometimes it would be 2 weeks that they would finish things for. Now, I think a lot of those back in those days were wet fill. And looking back, not great. But it was, I mean, this is quite different. I mean, I suppose they're going to have a lot of residual character of the beer left. So Annabelle, let me ask this about from a technical standpoint. When you get these beer casks, like presumably at the very least they're dumped, but like, do you rinse them at all, or do they just get filled with the spirit right off the bat? How does that work?
Well, the advice I would give to anyone receiving beer casks is rinse them really, really, really well. We did not do that. And as a result, Simon, because he is also our warehouseman, so he suffered this problem for his own whiskey, had somewhat of a difficult problem disgorging them because, I mean, we're not used to this is the first beer cask finish we've ever done. And we were just not prepared for the yeast residue that was left in them. And that means, it's not like a dumping out, make sure there's no kind of loose liquid left in there. It's a proper, you've got to give them a good hosing out. And we did not do that. And funnily enough, the blender from Thompson Brothers came a few weeks ago to the distillery, and we were tasting Quite Rebel Simon, and we got onto this conversation. He said, we had that happen as well. And I said to Simon when it happened, I know there are other people in Scotland who've had this experience, and we just didn't ask them before this happened.
But what happened? Like, did it just gum? Like, did the bung get glued into there?
No, it just gets actually. So the issue is that the yeast settles in the barrel, and so you don't really know it's there when you receive them. You don't know it's there if you just open the barrel. But if you do a good mixing job to take a sample out of the barrel, what you get is cloudy liquid. I mean, it looks like it's been bottled at 40% and put in the freezer kind of thing. But actually the solution is you just need to, and the problem is that when we tried to extract it like that, there's so much residue in there that it gums up all the filters. So you've got quite a big operational issue. But the solution was just to let it settle and then extract it. So it was fine. It was just
Messy.
2 days of Simon's time.
So I'm curious about this though. Like, if you were to rinse those casks, how different would that beer cask finishing be?
Well,
would you lose some of that kind of chocolate malt profile? Because I can't imagine the beer is going to sink that deep into the pores of the wood.
that is a great question, Andrew. And next time we do a stout cask finish, I will let you know.
Okay.
But I don't know.
Fair
We will never know how much
Yeah.
it was the beer in the wood versus the yeast in the cask.
That also seems to be reminiscent to like when they're doing like Lee's work with wine, when they're like when they stir up, and it's definitely it's a completely different exposure for the spirit than you would ever have. Yeah, it's super intriguing. It also implies that they're fermenting that beer in the barrel and not just aging it. That's kind of cool too.
Okay. One last whiskey, and then we'll go through and do a speed round, and then let Chris and Annabel finish their day, which, I mean, we're into the new day, but it's a whole other thing.
Is it today? Is it yesterday? I don't know.
Exactly.
We've got another tasting after this, Andrew. We're just warming up. We're doing California next.
Well, I was going to say either that or like maybe an early one for Hawaii.
Yeah.
Hawaii would be a
Great
couple of
idea.
hours behind us. Yeah.
I'll make the call.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're on the organic.
Okay. So this is always a lovely one to finish on because it brings us full circle back to where we started. So this is Nc'nean Cask Strength. And it's really easy to explain because it is a cask strength version of Nc'nean Organic that we tried first. So it's the same cask proportions. It's bottled at about, I mean, it depends on the batch, but 59% is on kind of normal cask strength. So it's got those same cask proportions, 55% STR, 43% bourbon, 2% sherry. And I like to think of this as Nc'nean Organic on steroids. It's super juicy. I find it very mouth-watering. I think that is the best description I have for it. Super juicy, super fruity, lovely and buttery and creamy. Just lots of those vibes that we found in Nc'nean Organic, but much stronger.
Yeah, and still very approachable even for a sub 10-year-old whiskey. I mean, it's interesting when you go to cask strength, you can have a whiskey at 40, although better 46, and then go to cask strength, and it can drink like two completely different spirits because of that concentration of flavor. At cask strength, it's a little warm, but it's not rough. There's no rough edges. I mean, going back to some of the advice you had, we talked about Jim Swan earlier on and his way of making whiskey, which, I think one of the things in this pantheon of new distilleries that are out there is a lot of them had the benefit of learning from hundreds of years of experience how to make whiskey in a way that can be approachable at a younger age. I mean, I would hate to see what 3-year-old or 5-year-old Dalwhinnie tastes like, but they don't need to do that because they're waiting 15 years until they put a bottling
Exactly.
together.
Yeah.
It's impressive, um, how approachable and how drinkable this is at cask strength, um,
It's it,
for its
it
age.
I don't think it drinks like it's 59%.
Mm-mm.
Um, and I'd say or it might even be too drinkable given it's 59%.
A
Yeah,
little
let's
dangerous.
say so.
Sean, any thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
yeah. I like the so I think the ABV really does amplify those notes of orchard fruit
Mm,
on the palate for sure. It really bursts. I also so this is also like this is the young spirit kind too. So I think like that
correct.
probably
Yeah.
that I mean that helps even with the cask strength. Like you're not getting quite as much of those like prickly volatiles. I'm sure they're probably kind of come off in the probably in the four shots, I imagine, but I don't know. Yeah, no, it's pretty excellent. Super drinkable, like dangerously drinkable.
Hmm. All right, Sean, are you ready for the speed round?
Yeah, I guess.
Why? Why? This is
I feel pressure when you call it that.
sometimes the speed round gets stuck in the mud though, and we get stuck on one whiskey. But I mean, really, we just want to go back and see because I mean, one of the things that's not talked about is oxidation with whiskey, um, how it changes things, even in the bottle. I mean, it's
Yeah,
funny,
absolutely.
Sean. We have a Kleinlish whiskey that we bottled with Boutique Whiskey that has Sam Simmons and I urinating on a monument to the Duke of Sutherland, as you do on the label. And when we first got it, it was good, but it was not like it was a little raw. And it was one of the few casks we've ever bottled that we didn't taste first. But like 2 years on, the whiskey's drinking a lot better than it did when we first got it. It's more interesting now, and I think there's this is not something that gets talked about a lot, whether it's oxidation in bottle or just pouring it in the glass and giving it time to breathe. But I find these things really change and settle quite a bit over the course of an hour.
Quite a
I
bit.
completely
Yeah.
agree. And it's also the same thing, right? When you open a bottle for the first time.
Yeah. I
Oh
mean,
yes.
sometimes like a wine, they're too tight. They're too
Yeah.
tightly wound. They need a little bit of time to breathe and open up. So Sean, back to the organic single malt. It's maltier now. It's honey,
Yeah.
nice mix
Much
of both
maltier.
white
Yeah.
and citrus fruits.
Yeah. Some of the citrus is faded to me very, very much more malty, even almost like I don't know, like wheat bran
Mhm.
and the grain husk that I did get originally is still like a very staple of that base.
Yeah. And I get like a creamy mushroom soup on the nose too.
Oh, that's actually a really good call. Yeah.
Palate's very drinkable, malty, some nice spice. Again, citrus, orchard fruits, a little bit earthy as well.
Yeah. Maintains that creaminess really nicely.
Yeah, that's good. Annabelle, if you want to play along too, you're more than welcome. But
I've only got one glass, I'm afraid.
Chris,
Well, I've
Chris
got
is
three, but
Chris has been speed rounding the whole tasting. All right, okay, Sean,
This
lemon
one.
meadow.
So I don't know if I would say this one's changed a whole lot. Like it really still screams like nice fresh lemon and like I said, a bit of those leafy herbs.
It's to me, it's more the lemon rind and like lemon pledge. Like if you remember like the old commercial where like if this lemon furniture polish is good enough for the house of the Lord, it's good enough for your house too. Just reminds me a little bit of that. I don't know if that was a thing in the UK, but it was an advertisement here for like
no, I'm
polishing of wood.
if it was, I didn't see it, but I'm gonna go and look it
Yeah.
up. It sounds great.
Mhm.
I really love how fresh that stays on the palate. Even like yeah. I don't know if I could say it's changed a whole lot for me, but it is. Yeah, that's a really beautiful whiskey for sure.
But Sean, think about this. This is sub 10 years old. If you were to blind this on the palate, this tastes like it's in the 12 to 15 range.
Was this the one that was 7 years?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Because you
almost
did.
all 7 years. There's like
Yeah,
one younger cask in there, but
you did that crazy. I couldn't help but like think that I don't maybe all distilleries do this. I don't know, but I can't help but feel it's a little ballsy to like start experimenting right away when you know you had this professional come and say like this is what you should do, this is what you do. But I mean at the same time, I mean, if you don't do it right away, I suppose you're kind of pigeonholed for a bit until you're able to catch
Well,
up.
and
So
also, if you discover this whole idea of experimenting with yeast, we were really doing on our own. Jim wasn't with us by this stage. We had
Yeah.
no one guiding us. The yeast companies thought we were crazy. So I kind of wanted to figure out whether this was a goer or whether we should just
Mhm.
not bother and it not be part of our future. But also, the thing about running a whiskey distillery is you've got to be planning 5 to
Yeah,
10 to 15 years ahead. So if you think this is a cool thing to do, you better start doing it straight away, because otherwise you're going to be kind of kicking yourself that you can't talk about it. But sorry, when this is not turning into a speed round, but the interesting thing about this champagne yeast is one of our first yeast experiments. We didn't release it until this year because it wasn't ready. Some of the other yeast experiments we've done have been ready super quickly, and we've got a beer yeast that will be coming out next year, which are ready like really, really young. So in spite of doing it early and the thought that we could release it sooner, it didn't work out that way. So sometimes you just got to roll with the punches.
Well, and I think one other point to that is in the scale of your business over time, if one of these small experiments doesn't meet the expectations you have for it, as long as it's not dreadful, it can just be blended into something down the line and
Absolutely.
quietly
Yeah,
disappear.
it's
So
absolutely exactly.
it's part of the production. Okay. Yeah, the Sean Ronda Orchard Cobbler now. Any other thoughts on this one? Or
no,
was this the one that we were just talking about that was more mature?
no, that was
No, that was the last
the
one.
the lemon Meadow.
Yeah.
I mean, it still screams. I mean, like a orchard
Uh,
cobbler. Like
But this one still for me is very cognac-y on the nose. I can't quite pin it down. That's very
I actually
pretty.
I like the time in glass. It just becomes a bit more of a desserty whiskey for me for sure. Like
Yeah. Okay. Quiet Rebels Gordon, the Diageo fellow who's uncomfortable with not doing the same thing every single day. But he does it because he's a good employee.
He's a
and
quiet rebel, Andrew.
He is
Exactly.
a quiet
Just doesn't
rebel.
really always realise
He
it.
didn't know he needed this experimentation in his life until I forced it upon him. Now he quietly revels in it whilst outwardly protesting.
Mhm. It's gotten really earthy, like very savory on the palate. A lot of almost like umami notes.
yeah, the nose did not point to that. Like
Mhm.
it was a bit more fresh on the nose, but the palate, you're right, is a bit more I don't know. Yeah, savory, I guess, is the only way I could really put it.
Okay. Amy, Quiet Rebels Amy.
Ooh, that almost had a hint of like a medicinal note on the nose when I first brought it up.
Sean, I thought you were going to say it had a hint of sustainability and public transport.
Not
I can
just a
smell
hint of
the
sustainability,
yeah,
Andrew.
it smells like carbon capture.
Hint of biomass, some
Yeah,
organic, some
yeah.
excellent water recycling.
Oh, I had a question about that. So with your biomass powered, I mean, I guess like with that, there's some debate like with how sustainable that is, like with like carbon in general. Are there ways or like to move away from that at all, or is there other plans to adjust things as you go forward when other like if there are other ways to do it that are a little well, because even that's still like just carbon release, right? And even if the trees are being replanted, is there anything like going forward thoughts with that stuff?
I mean, I could talk for hours about this. So it is carbon released, but it's also carbon that was absorbed by the trees growing.
Yeah.
So it is short cycle carbon. By the way, fermenting barley is exactly the same process. So every time we ferment, unfortunately, we release the carbon that was captured by the barley when it's growing. So it's the same process. Some of the criticisms of biomass have been about shipping wood around the world in order to fuel a biomass boiler over. Well, in fact, a lot in Scotland with wood from the States, for example.
Well, I think
Our
there was a big
biomass tank.
controversy on wood from British Columbia finding its way to Scotland for biomass boiling.
Exactly. I mean,
Oh,
that is
interesting.
absolutely
Yeah.
totally and utterly ridiculous and not at all sustainable. Our forest is 1 mile away, and our distillers are wood chippers. So Simon, when he's not warehousing or distilling, literally goes and chips the wood that's 1 mile down the track. So actually, the answer is no, because I'm quite comfortable with the sustainability of the solution that we have at the moment. If we were to look at alternatives, you would probably be looking at electrical generation,
Yeah. You guys
maybe
don't do
hydrogen.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say you guys don't do what like geothermal there. You don't have access to that in Scotland. Okay,
No,
okay,
we
yeah,
don't
that's
have
fine.
access to that. I mean, in theory, you could start looking at tidal power, but
Yeah.
it's so, I mean, you do it on a mass scale. We do not have the resources producing 100,000 LPA a year to think about tidal power.
Seems
So
like a
you
money
could
sink too. Yeah.
you can start thinking about things like solar, but actually, if you think about the resources that would be so you're throwing away a biomass boiler which has carbon built into it, and then you're mining all of those precious metals for the solar panels and the batteries. It's not the right solution. So we will let the biomass boiler run, and I'm hoping that in 15 years, when that's run its life, there will be some even better solution than acres and acres of solar panels, but who knows?
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Sorry,
All right.
long sidetrack
Where
there.
are we up to?
No,
Sorry.
no.
We keep
Well, Sean, this is the speed round that occasionally
This is
gets
like
stuck.
slow,
Well,
fast.
I did have questions that I didn't really get a chance to ask throughout the tasting. So
Well, Sean, let's finish the speed round and then we can ask
Yeah.
the additional questions.
Okay.
So we're on to Simon's Quiet Rebels bottling here. The one that's not quite here yet.
I mean, we only tasted this 10 minutes back now, so I mean, like it's very, very similar to what it was.
Yeah.
I really
great.
like that roasted barley note on it. Like it is like, and I don't. There's only a couple whiskeys I've really had that on in the past. Like not very many. In fact, most of them are whiskeys that have been made with roasted barley, and that
Like
that
the
changes much more the profile.
The original Signet, not maybe so much the Signet that's out now, but
Yeah.
back in the day.
Yeah, like that the Ardbeg Ardcore, I think too. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And what about the back to cask strength? I know we were just there a moment ago. Still drinking very well. A little touch warm, but like not surprising given the ABV. What are we at? 59?
I really like the cask strength.
Mm. I love the
I mean,
purity on it. It's that
Yeah.
purity of fruit that I think really marks it out.
Yeah. Now, I did notice we talk about this a lot in our tastings because Evan, who schedules them usually and then creates a poll for us, did not create a poll. In fact, if you're wondering why you didn't receive the email calendar reminder today with the link until 1 p.m. Alberta time, it's because Evan was on his way to Edmonton or somewhere near Edmonton for a hockey tournament with one of his children. So I sent it, and related to that, there is no poll, including there is no cheeky third question, which Evan usually throws out there. So what I would encourage people to do is if you want to tell us your favorites in the chat, please fire that into the chat. I have 3 favorites picked out, which is kind of surprising to me, but there was 3 that really stood out. I'm not sure of the order yet. Sean, have you got favorites from tonight's lineup?
Yeah, I think okay, so I think okay, number 3 is the cask strength. Oh wait, do we say 3 or 2?
No.
Do I get 3?
You get 3. You get
Okay,
3,
yeah,
Sean.
yeah. Number 3 is
We normally only let the participants have 2, but because we're greedy and it's our tasting, we let ourselves have 3.
And I'm notoriously wishy-washy, and I do so many ties that I like
Yes.
everything almost. Like
It's like 5 whiskeys, 2 ties.
No, it's good though. We got some clear standards. So let's go with cask strength is number 3. Lemon Meadows is number 2, and I think like the Cobbler is number 1, I think for me. Yeah.
Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah, I'm very similar to that. I think I'm Orchard Cobbler number 1, Lemon Meadows number 2, and Simon number 3. I just really like that. As much as I like the cask strength, I just like how unique the Quiet Rebels Simon release is.
It was a close one for me, that one for sure.
Yeah,
I,
yeah. And go ahead.
oh no, I didn't. Yeah.
Okay. Well, some votes in the chat there. David's saying cask strength, Simon's Cobblers. Uh, Paul is saying tasty, tasty. So I think we can interpret that one. Uh, not a bad whiskey for Stephen. Love the cask strength and the Orchard Cobbler. Stephen Tro said cask strength, Simon, Amy Organic. Um, yeah. David said, Andrew, we're always opposite. I guess, David, you're my Evan tonight. Evan and I are always opposite. And I think Evan goes the opposite direction for me out of spite, but that's okay. Everyone needs their own place in the world. Now, Sean, you said you had a couple of other questions you wanted to ask. I suppose this would be the time to do it because we're going to wrap this up shortly and let Annabel finish her yesterday so she can go to sleep and start her tomorrow.
Okay, a lot of these were already answered. Like I was asking like how much of that longer spirit you do, but I think you said, did you say 6 weeks out of the year or something like that?
Yeah, like 10%-ish.
10%. Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
Now so I couldn't really find a lot of information on this, but like your still line arms, like they tilt down and it says that there's a sub cooler on your line arms. Is that just like another word for a purifier?
Well, no, it's not. And just see if I can get a photo of our stills up,
Ooh,
actually.
Sean, what a question.
And I'm really intrigued that you found somewhere that talked about our subcoolers, because we don't actually use them. So that is very
Yeah, quote.
intriguing.
It does say that they're not in use. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Huh. Well, very accurate info wherever you found that. So here is our beautiful still house. So the subcoolers are actually related to the cooling pond. We have a cooling pond, as I'm sure you know. Many distilleries are on rivers. The reason they're on rivers is because distilleries' water usage is actually concentrated in the water used for cooling rather than the water used that actually goes into the whiskey, which you'll be glad to know is kept completely separate. We are not on a river, so we did not have that luxury. The solution presented to us by engineers was a cooling tower, which is very chemically and energy intensive. It is also a maintenance nightmare, and I just did not fancy that. So we had the idea of digging a giant pool. And in fact, here you can see the warm water going in one end and the cold water comes out just under here. It is a very simple closed loop system. It's actually, well, it's semi-closed loop system. It is topped up by the rainwater that falls on the warehouse roofs, which are just up here. So that comes down in the pipe. But this made the engineers extremely nervous because they could not calculate the cooling capacity of this pond when we were designing the distillery. So you can see the still house here. These are our condensers. They are oversized for the stills because that was kind of one of the remedies for these nervous engineers. But the other remedy, and I guess the reason this is particularly important is because to create this delicious new make, we have to have the temperature in the spirit safe sub 20 degrees. And so we were saying to the engineers, it has to be below 20. And they were saying, oh, I can't guarantee that. So their suggestion was put in subcoolers. And if necessary, you can add electric or some kind of other cooling system to these subcoolers. So you can't actually see this. Well, you can. There are these tiny little copper things here. So it's just a secondary cooling mechanism. That's all it is. But it was put in to mitigate the supposed risk. Now, what is very interesting, you see this very clearly in this picture. The stills are copper coloured. When stills are newly installed and they're lacquered, they turn this pink colour. And when they heat up, they turn back to the coppery colour that you all know and love. And the fact that 7 years on, these condensers are still pink shows just how effective our cooling pond is, because these condensers, unlike in every other distillery you will go to, are still pink. So that spirit is cooling extremely quickly when it hits those condensers, which is another contributing factor to the quality of the new make and thus the whiskey, much of which we've talked about tonight.
Interesting. It's funny that they even had to mention it then, because like I suppose it's like for the most geeky and maybe I don't know like engineers, it's worth mentioning, but it's not completely pertinent.
It's totally irrelevant. I mean, they're
It's a
literally not used.
redundancy.
It's
Yeah,
totally
that's
redundant.
interesting.
And every time I
Yeah.
look at them, I'm like, God, I wish I'd
But-
been paid for those.
But I mean, I'm sure it's the same in the UK. Like I know engineers in North America get a ring from some bridge that fell down a long time ago as a reminder not to screw up. So I'm sure it's just this overemphasis on making sure that nothing can possibly go wrong.
Absolutely. Spot on.
Yeah. Well, there you go. But it seemed like it worked. Sean, any like what other question? That
Very
was
last
amazing.
one. Yeah.
Yes, I love it.
Okay, very last one. But just because you seem so adventurous with experimentation, have you experimented with any peated malts in order to maybe blend in for future releases?
hmm No, is the easy answer to that question. We do not use any peat, and I should have said this a lot earlier on. But anyway, we sneaked it in before the end. We use no peat, and that is because a huge part of our philosophy is trying to make. I should stop showing this picture now. Trying to make whiskey as sustainably as possible, and unfortunately for the peat lovers out there, digging up peat and burning it is not a very sustainable thing to do. Peat is a carbon sink which cannot be replicated without thousands of years of compression of sphagnum moss. Of course, you don't have to burn peat to get a peated flavour. We could buy extra Freud casks and mature our whiskey in it, which we have pondered, but kind of figured, well, that still started with peat, and we don't really want to endorse that as a process. I actually have a top secret project that I'm working on right now, which might change the answer to this question.
Oh,
But I
okay.
can't tell you
Interesting.
about it until next year. So we'll have to do this
fair.
again in a year's time.
Very
So
cool.
And you
watch
can
this
ask me the same
space.
question. Exactly.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, my part of my follow-up was the sustainability with peat too. So that's that. Yeah, wicked. Yeah, I love it.
Well, my dog's second visit, I believe, is a sign that the tasting is running along and towards its natural conclusion. Before we wrap, I do want to say a thank you to Yarka with Craftworks Spirits, who's the importer, for helping get this all set up. Thank you to Chris Maben, who made sure that the last 2 bottles got here in time. And Annabel, a special thank you to you for staying up late to host this for us. Hope to see you in person sometime, either on your side of the pond or on this side of the pond. But thank you very much for hosting this tasting. It was fascinating. I mean, I've tried some of these whiskeys. I was really not sure what to expect tonight, but Chris and I tried some things on my deck this summer, but this surpassed my expectations. So well done.
And sorry,
Thank you so
sorry,
much for having
Andrew.
me.
My computer decided to crash just at the point when you and Sean were saying which ones were your preferred whiskies in the range. What was the answers?
For me, it was Orchard Cobbler, Lemon Meadows, and Simon were my 3.
Yeah.
Cool.
And for
What about you,
me, 1, 2, 3 was Orchard Cobbler, Lemon Meadow, and then the Cask Strength.
Cool. Nice. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Annabel, again,
Thank you so
very
much for having me. It was such a pleasure. And yeah,
Yeah.
hope to see you in 3D rather than 2D. Many of you
Indeed.
soon.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
that
thanks
was
again,
wonderful.